So yesterday we got the ban list and I made both a live reaction to it as well as a live stream where we got to playtest a bunch of decks with the newer limitations. And I want to say between yesterday's live stream and today's testing, I have a much better idea of how this format will shape up. By the way, this will not be a top 10 best decks video, but you can expect that video to drop today, so stay tuned. Anyways, what did this ban list really do for Yu-Gi-Oh! And why are people not super happy with it? Starting off with the unlimited section of the ban list. It is completely irrelevant, we don't have to cover it, let's move on. The semi-limited section is also kind of irrelevant, but Thunder Dragon Colossus going to 2 is pretty cool, and I want to say at this point, I can imagine it going back to 3 in the next ban list. I also don't really understand why the Dragon Rulers have to go to 2 before going to 3 because they completely suck and nobody's trying to play a single copy of them. Again, the reason why the Dragon Rulers were banned in the first place wasn't only because they were good, it was especially because Dark Matter Dragon was a thing. And that card is still banned, rightfully so. Alright, now the limited section was a huge disappointment to me and a lot of people since we expected just so much more. There are 11 cards in the section, which not only is not enough, but also the limitations aren't even that big of a deal. For context, the best decks before the ban list were Snake Eyes and Yubel, and none of them really got nerfed too hard and are still top tier contenders. Honestly, opening of the Spirit Gates to 1 is nowhere near enough to make Yubel more balanced. The deck is still extremely powerful and consistent. As a matter of fact, I personally believe that it will be the better deck to play moving forward just because it got nerfed a little less than Snake Eyes. Plus, even when Snake Eyes was at full power, Yubel was strong enough to compete with it anyways, so the gap between the two decks wasn't even that big, and now I want to say it's even smaller. Speaking of Snake Eyes, that deck got nerfed in many ways, but people aren't satisfied with how it got nerfed. Or rather, people are really unhappy about the fact that it still exists. The reasoning for that is because even if you heard the consistency of the deck, which is what happened in this ban list, it's not even gonna matter that much because we're gonna be getting the Azamina engine in Rage of the Abyss in October, and that's gonna make the deck infinitely more consistent. Anyways, I'll get back to Snake Eyes in just a moment. But yeah, as I was saying before, Konami just hit a lot of the wrong cards, such as limiting Branded Fusion instead of banning Albion the Sanctifier Dragon or Gimmick Puppet Nightmare. If anything, they're almost boosting Despia because yeah, sure, we're losing 2 Branded Fusion, but the deck is also gaining Lawn Mowing. And I want to say the deck was already a 60 card deck even before Lawn Mowing, so yeah, it's pretty much free real estate for that deck. Oh, and speaking of Lawn Mowing, that card is cool and all, but you're not going to be playing it in every single deck because it's just a one-of. Yeah, sure, you can search it with Thrust and Left Arm Offering, but come on, you're not banishing your whole hand just to lose to 1 Ash. Stop the cap. As for Tenpai, they only limited Pot of Prosperity alongside Sangan Summoning, which is a good start, but it's absolutely nowhere near enough. I mean, we're seeing in the OCG that even with these limitations, once we get Rage of the Abyss with the new Molchemy Furaros and Dominus Impulse, the deck is going to be so much more, better than pretty much everything else that is not Snake Eye, not Yubel, that it's just going to be a top tier contender for sure. Essentially, we're pretty much back to square one because the deck is getting a slight nerf just to get a huge boost right after. I personally think Konami should have been a little more creative and maybe limited something else on top of the field spell just so that we're a little different from the OCG. Because again, we know for a fact that Tenpai is going to be absurd real soon with the current card pool at our disposal. Alright, so for the unban, Ava, it really seems like it's super spicy for Drytron, but it changes absolutely less than nothing. I tried my best figuring out some lines with Ava, and honestly, it's literally impossible. I want to say the deck was probably just better off without Ava anyways, because the Drytron NU2 that we got in Infinite Forbidden locks you under only being able to summon Machine Ritual monsters anyways. And again, without Beatrice, you really cannot do the same thing that you used to be able to do, so yeah, forget about Ava. And also forget about playing that card in other decks because it's really just super gimmicky and not worth playing overall. Basically, that card only makes your hand better when you're already doing super well, so yeah, it's a win more, and it, again, doesn't make Drytron much better out of nowhere. Okay, now for the ban section, I think this is where people lost their patience the most. A lot of us were anticipating maybe like around 10 cards in this section because a lot of cards that currently exist do not deserve to exist. And I think Konami has been a little too lenient by only banning 4 cards. They had a great opportunity to fix the game and completely change this format, but instead of that, they just watered down the current format. So yeah, in other words, this format is the same as before, but with slightly worse decks. Yeah, that's it. So banning Fiendsmith Lacrimosa is something that pretty much none of us could really predict as they were a bunch of Fiendsmith cards that could have taken the hit. Some people were predicting Engraver to 1, which I think is really stupid, the Link 1 band, Moon of the Closed Sky band, or even Fabled Lurie band, and some people even predicted the Link 2 that fuses to get banned, or DSE Ray to get banned, or I guess Lacrimosa to get banned, so pretty much every single card in the engine. But yeah, without Lacrimosa we can no longer burn for 1200 damage, which is very good. That was extremely annoying, and it also makes a lot of Fiendsmith lines much worse. Now, Beatrice and Apple are obviously really good and necessary hits, we can all agree on that, but that was super predictable, so let's move on. Now they banned King Calamity instead of Crimson Dragon, which means that Centurion and Blue Eyes are still really good options. And by Blue Eyes, I don't mean actual current Blue Eyes, but rather Blue Eyes full structure deck. It's gonna be a tier 1 deck for sure. Okay, so in other words, what does this imply for us and how does this ban list really affect us? First off, shifter decks are still very annoying, so Tenpai, Ritual Beast, Flunderies, and Kashtira can still ruin your day. Tenpai can still OTK practically just about as easily as it could before, but now it has to accommodate for the consistency nerf by playing potentially more starters. So now I can see cards like Dora Dora being a 2 of or 3 of, whereas before it was like a 0 or a 1 of. Ritual Beast in particular will be one of the best decks since not only does it abuse Shifter more than everyone else, it can also Protoss the shit out of people. Ritual Beast also does not lose to Bestials or Board Breakers, which makes it a very good meta call in a format with Yubel. Now the Gimmick Puppet deck can still FTK with only one field spell using only one Gimmick Puppet of Strings and one Dark Strings, but the limitation of Dark Strings still hurts the deck dramatically. It makes the deck way less resilient and less able to grind, so getting hit by Bestials and DD Crow can hurt a little more than before. So this hit forces you to look at other options and it makes a bunch of FTKs no longer work the same way they used to. Of course, if your hand is broken, then it doesn't matter, you can still FTK, but what it changes is that when your hands aren't great, then you might not be able to FTK anymore. So yeah, Gimmick Puppet can still FTK, it's still an FTK deck, but it FTKs way less often. That's the only thing that you need to remember. Speaking of puppets and annoying FTKs, Despia can still Gimmick Puppet Nightmare Lock you because absolutely nothing has changed. And honestly, their consistency level barely dropped. They can easily just replace the second and third branded fusion with something like, I don't know, that grass looks greener, and either an extra Luber or Spriggan's Kid or something. Now again, the Drytron deck barely got any better, and even if people managed to figure out some combos with Ava, I wouldn't really be super impressed or anything. Yubel is, in my opinion, the deck to beat this format and the ultimate investment because I think it's going to be an extremely good deck long term. The deck can take full advantage of the Fiendsmith engine drastically better than everyone else because it also bridges into your Yubel engine. You don't need Beatrice in the Yubel deck because you can just make Aerial Eater and then send Samsara D Lotus and then revive it back with Muckraker, so Fiendsmith Engraver is a 1-card combo. The deck is extremely oppressive and also because of its existence, we can expect a lot of Bestials and Board Breakers to see play this format. Snake Eyes will no longer be the best deck until we get Azamina and Rage of the Abyss in October, so again, it's gonna be a good long-term investment, but at the current moment, it's just a good deck, but it's not necessarily the best deck. The reason for that is because the Fiendsmith cards can no longer get your engine started, so if you have like Engraver and no Snake Eye cards, well, you're not really doing much of anything because you can't go Beatrice and then Promethean Princess, etc. And also, Snake Eye Populace is now a Garnet, so if you draw it and Bonfire, you're not doing that much, and your grind game is way worse because you have way less names in your deck. Now, the deck also has an issue with a lack of starters, which makes the pure Snake Eye deck more or less viable for the time being. However, I am in no way discrediting Snake Eye cards in general. I just think the Snake Eye deck will be better off with another engine to help fix the lack of consistency. So I can imagine people, for example, playing Melodious Snake Eye or Kashtira Snake Eye, Fire King Snake Eye, or even Rescue Ace. If anything, all those decks might actually be better than just pure Snake Eye with barely any Snake Eye cards to begin with. I think the Fiendsmith engine will be much smaller in that deck since you no longer have Lacrimosa and Beatrice, obviously, so I think it's just gonna be like 4 cards in the extra deck and 1 Engraver. People are now forced to be a little more creative with the Snake Eye deck since the options that used to work before might not be optimal anymore. Also, with the loss of Appaloosa, I can imagine drastically more players switching towards the Rabbit Link 2 in order to get Azaroon because that's a lot of interruptions off of pretty much 2 monsters. The sad reality is, this format will still feature decks that can play tons of non-engine just like before, and of course this makes the game extremely volatile and hand dependent, which is not enjoyable. The difference between this format and last format is that hand traps are going to be a little less of a necessity because you can no longer really FTK your opponent with Beatrice. So in other words, this format could shape up to be a full board breaker format or a hybrid between hand traps and board breakers. You could, I don't know, for example, main deck Forbidden Droplet, main deck Triple Tactic Thrust, and Talent, and maybe a Dark Ruler in your deck. And you could also main deck Molchami Aurelia to draw into those board breakers or discourage your opponent to full combo. Perhaps the ideal configuration would be a mix between hand traps and board breakers, but I think the small hand traps like Veiler and Ghost Murner will see way less play. And finally, trap decks and stun decks like Runic will exist, but I don't think they will be super ideal to play. So yeah, in conclusion, this format is pretty much the same format but part 2, or at this point like part 10 because it's been the exact same thing since the start of the freaking year. The only difference is that consistency and power levels have dropped a bit more, which means that we have to start looking at other options, other kinds of non-engine, etc. I wouldn't be shocked to see tons of Snake Eye, Yubel, Tenpai, Ritual Beast, and other decks dominating the event, just like before. If anything, I'm pretty much anticipating this format to be exactly the same. By the way, my goal wasn't necessarily to influence you with this video. You can think whatever you want of this format. I just wanted to present as much information as possible. And again, you can expect tons of new format videos coming up real soon, so stay tuned. Anyways, that's it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys very, very soon. Peace.